Basically, what we're going to do this evening is cover the who, what, when, why, and how of budgeting. And the how is kind of the key step, and that's what I think a lot of people tend to struggle the most with. You sort of understand in broad strokes why you need a budget and why people ask about budgets, but the how is where kind of all the good theory falls apart a little bit, so to speak. So who should be doing budgeting? It's not just the finance office of your organization, unfortunately. Most of us would like to sort of outsource this task to, our accountant or our controller or someone who's sort of number savvy. But that's not really who should be doing it. It's management of the organization. Sometimes that's the executive director, sometimes that's a team of management, sometimes that's a whole lot of people that goes beyond what we would think of as sort of senior management. But it's the management of the organization that has the responsibility for developing the budget. They should take ownership of the process and really understand sort of what's going on with the budget, where the amounts come from, how they were derived, so that management can answer questions that the board is going to be asking. In a really excellent functioning organization, management should be talking to people across the organization at all levels as they develop the budget. The board's role is to approve the budget. So ideally, the managers of the organization, the executive director or the CFO or whoever's role it happens to be, will bring the budget to a board meeting and probably circulate it ahead of time and present the budget to the board and ask their approval for the budget for the coming fiscal year. And the board's job is to approve the budget, but not just to rubber stamp it. You want your board to really understand the budget. Now, they probably won't understand every single line item, and if you have a finance committee or a budget committee, they'd probably go into more detail than the full board would. But they need to understand kind of in broad strokes the year's budget and sort of current year actual budget information to understand how the performance for a particular year compares to the budget and then how to plan for the future. And then they may ask for even longer term projections because it's the board's role to understand not just what the controller sort of wants or is thinking about, or not just what a program officer wants or is thinking about, but it's the board's job to understand how the whole organization sort of comes together. What is a budget? At its most basic, a budget is a planning tool. And it is a tool. It's something that should be useful and should be helpful to people at various levels of the organization. There are sort of two different broad types of budgets. One is a project budget or a proposal budget. It's a budget for something very specific. Maybe it's a program. Maybe a funder has a particular interest in one specific program and has asked for a budget for just that program. That is very different from the organizational budget overall, which would cover a particular time frame. So maybe 1 year of the organization's life, for example. They could also have a 5 or a 10-year budget, but basically what you would have is an organizational budget would cover a time period versus a program budget which covers just one sort of entity in particular. Now, the one entity in particular should be part of the overall organization budget, of course, but you can certainly break it out and just look at that one program budget in isolation, and that might be a very useful exercise. Speaking about the organizational budget, that is a roadmap to success, and that sounds, very like MBA businessy speak, but it really is. It's a way for an organization to sort of put pen to paper and figure out how it's going to achieve its long-term goals. Not its lofty, we want to save the world goals, but it's more tangible and more quantifiable. We want to reach, twice as many people next year as we did this year. That's a great goal, and to be able to quantify that is really important. And then to be able to develop a budget lets you actually achieve that. The other important role that the budget plays is it serves as a reality check. Oftentimes, you'll do your budget pretty much when someone asks you for it, but not much ahead of that. And then you'll never look at it again until around the same time the following year when someone else asks for the budget again. So if you could get into the habit of checking in with your budget on a pretty regular basis, twice a year, quarterly, whatever sort of works for your organization, you can see how you're doing. You can see if the funding that you hoped or thought you would get is actually there, or maybe it's not there because lots of people have had to cut funding. So maybe your reality is very different from what you thought it would be when you started budgeting. And if that's the case, you need to figure that out in the middle of the year and make changes, or figure out sort of how you can solve that problem before the year is over. Because once the year is over, the numbers are what they are, and your accounting statements or audited financial statements will show your performance exactly as it was. If you can use your budget to sort of identify any issues, maybe 3/4 of the way through the year or halfway through the year, then you can make changes so that maybe you could break even for the year instead of losing money. So it's really important to use your budget as a reality check midway through the year. The when is, I think, one of the most important parts, and we touched on this just a moment ago very briefly. Oftentimes, you budget once a year and only under duress when someone asks you for your budget. If you could think of your budget as more of an ongoing process, I promise it will be less painful. Because if you only look at it once a year, you have to spend so much time remembering what you did last year. It's just a waste of time. So if you can visit it at least a couple times during the year, I promise it will be easier and less painful. So there are 3 kind of phases. There's the beginning phase, the middle phase, and the end phase. And I've used an analogy before that budgeting is like brushing your teeth. And it's about as exciting for most of us as brushing our teeth. But when you brush your teeth during the day, you always do it in the morning, and you always do it before you go to bed, and you should probably do it after lunch too, or after a big meal. That's like budgeting. You always do it at the beginning of the year. You always do it at the end of the year, so you can see kind of where you ended up, and you need to do it at least once midway through the year so that we can think about those reality check moments that we talked about a few minutes ago. In the beginning part, that's your plan. That's when you're making projections for the year or longer if you're doing a longer term budget. And that's when you're making guesses and making some assumptions about how you think things will turn out. In the middle, you're assessing your project, your status so far. You're seeing how things are turning out, and you're sort of grading yourself on whether or not your assumptions and your projections were accurate or close, or not even remotely close at all. And you're making corrections and adjustments for the rest of the year while you still have time to do them. Okay, now we get to the how. This is my new 3-step how program. And the most exciting part of this is that step 1 doesn't even have any numbers involved. So it's a 3-step budgeting process, and a third of it doesn't have anything to do with numbers. So what you need to do is make a list. Make a list, make a lot of different lists, and only use words in your list. List the goals of your organization, goals of the budget, sort of understand what you want to accomplish. And then the most important part, list every expense you can think of, and list every income source or source of funding you can think of. You want to make your budget work. So what that means in the nonprofit world is you make your revenue equal your expenses, or you make your expenses equal your revenue. You can see on the example I've handed out, it's blue on mine, I think it's gray on yours. Your total support line is equal to your total cost line. As you're presenting budgets, you want to show that your total income sources equals your total expenses, and vice versa. In the for-profit world, that's very different, but that's not what we're talking about today. Step 3 after step 2 seems like a breeze. You group like items. So at first, that's as simple as putting all your income pieces together and putting all your expense pieces together. That's the first grouping, and that's really easy. The next grouping is sort of one more layer. You put all your corporate income sources together and all your individual income sources together. And then on the expense side, it's even more important. You put all your expenses that maybe relate to the same kind of thing together. If it's a particular program, maybe it's production expenses, maybe it's a scene, maybe it's costumes, maybe it's lighting. Those are all kind of production things, and they differ from general and administrative things. So after you have all your items and you have a reasonable estimate of what they are, grouping them together and letting them sort of organize themselves will help you present a very coherent budget to a funder.